Carey, thank you so much for being on Attribution Time. I'm so excited to have you. I feel like we've run in the same space for quite some time now. And it was, I don't know if it's providential or what, but this morning you had such a great post about attribution, marketing attribution, how this works across different departments. Love for you to kind of give a quick synopsis of that story.
Sure. Well, I knew we would be talking today, and I do spend a lot of time thinking about attribution, which is kind of weird, I think, but it just pops in my head all the time. Not to you, right? Like, I'm probably not the people listening to this. We're all thinking about attribution all the time. And one of the requests that I get a lot, and I've had for multiple years from people is, how do we report on credit? How do we show marketing gets credit for this or sales gets credit for this? How do we put all of this into a report? And it's a struggle to sometimes, it's very easy to get marketers on board with it. It's a little bit harder to get executives on board with the mentality of attribution as not being true reporting, but being kind of marketing insight. And so I'm often looking for what's the best metaphor to describe this. So what kind of came to me last night, and then I posted it this morning, was that if you were to get sick and go to the hospital, and imagine you spend a little bit more time there than something as simple as, even if it was as simple as breaking your arm, you go to the hospital, you're lucky you come away healed. If someone were to ask you, looking back, how would you break up the percentage of who healed you, the doctors or the nurses? That seems really similar to me how we approach sales and marketing, as if they're these two vastly different things. And the reality is, sales and marketing work as hand in hand towards bringing revenue in, as doctors and nurses and admins and all of that do, into bringing someone into health. And so it's pretty clear when you look at like the situation of a doctor and a nurse, you would never be like, oh, well, the nurse was responsible for 43% of your healing and the doctor was responsible for 57%, and that's how we split it up. You wouldn't ever do that, because you understand there's a timing issue. There's, what did the person come in pre-diagnosed with? There's, what was the situation at hand? It's so complicated when you look at medical. We have a tendency to try to oversimplify it in revenue as if it can be boiled down to one simple pie that we slice up and we say, thank you, marketing, for bringing us this. Thank you, sales, for bringing us this. Now we know how to invest all of our dollars. It's one button we push for this answer, and bing, bang, boom, we're all good to go. Yeah. It's never that way.
It's never that way. And I mean, just to take a little step further, because again, this is what we think about. It's like, from the point in which, how quick did you get to the hospital? Did you take your calcium pills after the hospital? Like, there's all these different parameters of like, okay, are people hitting the site? What are they consuming? What are they not doing that we can't see? It's like, there's all these different aspects.
What was the news of the day that they happened to be, was the stock market down? Was there a hurricane coming? All sorts of stuff. We forget how just general chance even plays a role in our sales. I mean, boy, can you imagine if we had to factor in luck? Woo.
Yeah, exactly. I've been having this conversation now through the opportunity of this podcast, but a common theme that's coming up is this go-to-market motion, kind of encompassing and bringing in so many different departments because of that. It's because we've segmented all these things, but that's where I think marketing attribution is headed. And I touched on this in my book. Like, marketing attribution, though it has marketing in front of it, I think it's where it started. It covers the gamut, right? And it's this whole entire emotion of, how are you going to market? Who's all involved? What are the processes? And then you get to the next step of, okay, now that we've already closed the deal, what's the motion? What's the process of closing the next deal? And that's a very different thing. And that continues to process. And that's where you begin to slice it up. But yeah, there's so many different motions involved in this from a business perspective.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I was thinking back to like where we started with marketing analytics. If we just go all the way back to analytics, 25 years ago. Yeah. I mean, I'm real young, so I wasn't. No, I'm a little bit. I know some of
what I've read about
in the old days. Yes. Yeah. But when we were doing much more email marketing and website marketing, and we were always reporting on stats, page views, conversion rates, time on site, opens, clicks, all of that, and for a very short, brief period of time, that was wonderful and everybody was happy. And then we started labeling those things vanity metrics, which is fair. They didn't really hold much weight. And
Sure.
I kind of think that in a way, attribution is like the next logical step of that, because if we look at email as a very simple one that almost everybody's familiar with, we are very we know how to track clicks and opens and click-through ratio. Even if we have a high email click-through ratio, if our audience isn't correct and we're getting a high click-through ratio, but it's not driving, pipeline or revenue, if it's not moving people closer to buying from us, it's not really that effective. So I think where attribution started to fill the gap that was needed was, are these meaningful metrics? Like attribution kind of applies the meaning of, did it drive pipeline? Did it drive revenue? Were we getting the right people? It's still not perfect at all. I think we would all agree with that. But it is that that evolution of I want to make sure not only what I'm measuring is accurate, but is it meaningful? So
yeah, exactly. I think that's the biggest thing, is someone looks at marketing attribution, and if it is siloed, like we're talking about how it can't be, but when it is siloed solely in marketing, it sits within marketing metrics,
right,
which at times can be clicks, opens, like how many people are engaging with this advertisement, and you really have to go from the top down.
right,
What are the KPIs? What are the primary objectives from the highest
right.
part, which is
Mm-hmm.
always some dollar amount, right? It's
Yep.
always about revenue. And that's where I think a lot of times marketing attribution gets off the rails and gets lost within organizations, is because it stays in the marketing department.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't start reaching out and saying, okay, what is it that you need us to report on? What is it that you're looking for us to
Right.
show our value in? And that might be one of those statements where it's like, yeah, but, or no duh, or whatever it is, but it's like, it's so common in marketing.
It's so common in marketing. And I think what happens is, especially, I think this will change as generations of workers kind of promote and do whatever. But, historically, we probably have more leadership in organizations that have come up through the finance side of things than we do the marketing side of things. Now, I have no stats to back that up. That's just straight up my hunch, but I would probably think it's close to true. And where that comes in is that people that come up from the finance side, with good reason, have a very great sense of numbers, but they're also used to things that can very easily be represented and distilled down onto a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so, because marketing reports and all of that are digital, there's this misrepresentation that because it's digital, because it comes from Salesforce or your other CRM or whatever, that it is the same as financial reporting. And it is not. And I think
it's a great call out.
It's like one of those things that we look at and we can say okay, well, we brought in, let's just keep the numbers really easy, $100,000 in revenue last year. I know that would be a very small company, but we'll keep it simple. If you look at that, easy math, we're going to go with $100,000, and we try to say well, we spent $20,000 in marketing to get there. Okay, well, we can't easily say that $40,000 came from the $20,000 what we spent. What we have to think is all of these things kind of work together. So you have to have your marketing team doing the broad communication, and you have to have your sales team picking up, once people come through the door and want to start having these personal conversations. And I think where we are kind of going wrong with this attribution is this idea of what can we attribute to marketing? Because it's in the organization, and the organization is looking at itself. What we need to look at from attribution is, what does attribution tell us about our prospects and our customers? We need to turn the focus outward. So then you can start to see, okay, well, I know that this group of people who came from paid ads that started clicking through on a certain topic, we know that pain point resonates really well with our audience. And our sales team should start looking at that, because I do think it almost gets granular down to the messaging, because you need to understand what is the person that's trying to buy from us thinking? What do they need help with?
Yeah.
And we have this very big tendency to lose that in attribution.
Yeah. You're spot. I think Chris from Refine Labs, he's always a big proponent of putting the, why did you, or how did you hear about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's the end all be all. I make fun of it at times, because it's if anyone just hears that one thing and they say that's marketing attribution, then you're like, oh gosh, they're like, it can help. But I think that's a clear example of that, where it's the idea of when sales can come in and better understand that story and then communicate that back. I'm reading a book right now. I think it's called Loved. And it's someone that came up and is about product marketing, but they even mentioned like getting ambassadors and kind of getting boots on the ground and going out and talking to the customers,
right,
and understanding that. And then obviously you have all this data that sits in there,
right,
but you have to like, you also have to hear the story, because the data only goes so far as like where, what's the actual emotional tie to the product, right?
right.
And how is that driving them forward? And so that once again just encompasses where sales and marketing need to be in communication around that, and hearing that as far as why are they buying, what are you hearing them say about this,
Right.
and keeping that as a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind when you say that is, I mean, I think that we all kind of know that, like, when we create this competition between sales and marketing of people competing for which revenue is attributed to them and the other department, what goes wrong with that is that sales and marketing start fighting. They start doing things that are based on the reports. They start changing data in the system so that even though the last touch point was a marketing touch point, we're going to make sure there's a call that it's attributed to. And what ends up happening is you end up losing sight of the customer. And sales and marketing are each other's best allies. I mean, the real difference between sales and marketing, I always heard it described long ago, is that like marketing is one to many and sales is one to one. So sales has these one-to-one conversations. They're going to get great insights they're going to get the individual stories. They're going to have the deep conversations with these. Well, that information can be used in marketing to kind of maybe do broader testing. And then you do start running digital ads that are based on bits of information we heard from the sales team. And then we can test those. And then that's where the attribution and the reporting comes in. We start looking and go like, all right, we ran 3 different types of messaging. Which one really brought in the right type of customer? Which one resonated the most? And I would love to see a lot more of, like, what's interesting to me is that attribution tends to be looked at as this very high level thing. It's executive level reporting. We need to provide the attribution of where all the revenue came from. And I would argue it's the actual opposite. It is very granular tactical reporting. It is like, it should be your boots. Like, I think every marketer should be intrigued by, like, show me what our Google Analytics says. Show me which pages are converting. Show me which email subject lines resonated. Like, that to me is where the most interesting part of attribution lies.
Yeah, agreed. I was talking with Andrew at Alignly, and he was saying, he had posted an article, and I just thought it was so great. It's the accelerators, right? So rather than trying to bid for, I'm responsible for this, or I did this, or what's influenced that, he used the terminology of post-op creation, what's accelerating it.
Yeah.
And I think that, within that, again, it's how do we communicate with each other and talk about those things. I thought that was just such a great word in communicating that.
That really is a great word, because I think we've all probably been, in addition to being marketers or salespeople, we've all been customers. And that, like, even you might think one product is the best thing that would be going, it would revolutionize your workflow. If you can't get by, timing is often outside of your control, especially at work. And there are these things that you just have to stay in contact with people, and you have to come up with ways to go back to what you said, that Loved book. You have to find a way to, like, get into that emotional side of a person at work. I mean, we're all still people. We're not robots at work. We're not B2B robots. We don't, trade our personality when we show up at work and just, operate solely on logic. Not yet.
Exactly. Not yet. Not yet. So where I guess I'm curious, where did marketing attribution hit for you? Like, when was the first time you were, like, it really took off, or maybe that you implemented it, or like when was that first aha moment of marketing attribution?
Yeah, it's really interesting. If I had to go back in time, my background's graphic design. And so I worked my way up through advertising agencies and design, but I've always had like this, a love for the business side of things. And so I worked as a sales and marketing manager for a golf course for a few years. And I had to, we had our particular golf course was, we brought people in from hotels. It was a resort golf course. So we had to consider tourists coming from out of town. We had to consider selling rounds online. So I had a boss who was constantly trying to teach me about like this thing called yield management, which is, golf rounds are a perishable inventory. The golf round that we have today at 3, if we don't sell it today, we can't sell it again tomorrow. It's gone.
Yeah, you're never going to get that revenue.
You're never going to get that revenue. And then you've got to like be considering like we could sell all of our rounds for $20, but we wouldn't stay in business at that rate. So then you had to like make sure that you were, so it was probably through that starting of like looking at this from this like very strategic business side of things, golf is, we had a beautiful course, everything going, but at the end of the day, we still have to do the messaging. We still have to get the word out so people know that. And through that, kind of like evolved and took a job working for a SaaS company that sells fleet management software, which is the natural next step after resort golf.
Clearly.
Management. I think we've all
selling spots on for golf. Yeah.
Girl meets golf, girl goes on to fleet management.
That's
and
right.
History.
There you go.
But through there, that's where I implemented Marketo for the first time. And I was just like dumb luck to be at that company back in I was with them in 2008, but we got it in 2012. And that is like where the idea of like acceleration went in, is that like now you have the tools to measure. Now you have the tools to connect the dots. Like, what are we doing in marketing and how is that impacting sales?
Yeah.
Loved that. I mean, that was like a fun puzzle that you're constantly doing to do that. And I think the important thing to me along the way is, and maybe it's because of my background in design, or maybe it's because I like my sweet spot with companies tends to be a little bit smaller, is that the data is always important. It's super important. But at the same time, it's not important at all if you don't keep track of the people. And so I've always loved this balance of what are we measuring, but what actually has meaning, because it's still, at the end of the day, even if we do a great job in marketing at getting the customers, is our product going to keep the customers? Are we going to have like a lot of turnover? Do we believe in the company enough to know that they're going to be something that our customers advocate for and do half the work for us? And that's what you really want. You want to get into like a company. We should all be striving to work for companies or leading companies where once we get a person in the door, we know we can keep them and they're going to bring more people in with them. That's the way. And that's old fashioned business, right? Like that doesn't need a computer. You don't need analytics software to do that. You don't need, so we have to blend this art and science. So all the science of numbers and what's working, but always keeping in mind that there are people represented by our spreadsheets.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, you can look at the data points of what's the most common journey for someone to get there. And then post sale, what makes this sticky and what makes them really enjoy this product. And I think that's where a lot of people show. I mean, that was the thing about Marketo, is like, obviously I work at Adobe, so I'm a Marketo person, but I think that's what helped it grow so fast is that stickiness. It answered a lot of questions that people were just like, I can't answer this question. And now I can. And it was there for it. So yeah, totally agree. You're on mute. Okay.
I literally just put my hand on the space bar, funny.
No worries.
What a great example though, because all of us who came up through Marketo still bleed purple. I mean,
no, it's absolutely,
I mean, it's funny to me that Adobe, no offense to your company, is dropping, moving away from like, Adobe, Marketo, and like Marketo is Marketo. Like we're not going to bleed red. We want to bleed. It had such brand loyalty because it was solving a problem that all of us were being asked at work. And it was giving us this like powerhouse of a tool that was super customizable, but really reliable to do it. And I mean, I remember, I think I was like a year into working with Marketo, and I said, I don't think I would ever take another job where if they don't have Marketo, I would want to do that job.
Yeah, I've been there. I've looked at MOPs jobs and I'm like, Pardot? No, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So what's the future of marketing attribution? Where do you think the trajectory is? Obviously, AI is a piece of it, but if you were to just to give a quick synopsis of like where you're seeing movements as you discussed it, as you share it on LinkedIn, what's sticking with people here, and what do you think is going to move it forward?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I'm a member of like this group of consultants that we all kind of talk and share once a month. We'll get together and kind of just have like a lunch and learn. And we're talking, is attribution going away? Because I think it was a really big buzzword, like maybe 3 to 5 years ago, where it really kind of like peaked as to like the word, make sure you're spending on visible, make sure you're looking at full, there's tools. And then I think we've kind of swept into like product-led growth had a big heyday. Now AI is just going to infuse all of it. I tend to be one, my kids maybe call me a dinosaur. I think of it as like long-lasting values, but I think that at the end of the day, it does come back to that idea of like being customer obsessed, loving your customer. And if AI helps you do that, then by all means, like that's going to be the way to go. Like wherever AI can kind of step in and offer you quicker access to insights, I think. But I think that attribution is maybe going to help measure the things that like have impact. So as long as you can do that, but you're still focused on the things that have impact and not reports that have impact, that's where I think attribution will need to go, because I think we've seen the generation in the workforce now is digital natives. Like I remember that when that term came out, but like we're not impressed by personalization tokens. We expect Amazon to show us like, hey, these are the batteries you need to buy when you buy that toy. Like we don't even worry. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I just search something just to see what else Amazon's going to tell me customers also bought. You know, we are so conditioned to this digital stuff that unless we all feel confident that the company that we're buying from has our back, as dumb as that sounds, like that's going to be where companies really succeed or fail. And no amount of attribution or AI or any of that is going to matter if the companies don't stand up for that. So I think that I think we're going to constantly be moving a little bit faster on technology. We're going to always want a report to give us the answer.
Absolutely. Executives are always going to need a report.
Yes.
Like I agree with everything you just said, but at the end of the day, if you were to go to the executive board and say, hey, we just got to be an advocate for our customers, they're going to be like, okay, well, how does this impact my revenue? Like it's just, so you're always going to need a report in that. But to your point, if we mold that a little bit more, if we can use the specific data points in which we're capturing to tell the story of how we're customer centric, how are we for the customer? And I think that's where a lot of these marketing attribution tools are getting at. I'm not saying all of them, but I think a lot of them are getting at what is meaningful for the customer, right? It's as close as we can get to before sales can get involved to ask them the questions and get to the heart of the matter, right? What are they looking at on your website? What are they engaging with? What's driving their, like, what's getting them excited about you, right? And I think that's the beauty of it. We call it marketing attribution, but it's really a way in which we organize and compartmentalize data. That's what we're doing, right? And we're trying to understand what's the emotional strings behind that, right?
Yep. If I could like masterfully sprinkle magic dust over the industry and make attribution more accepted, like have a better understanding from the executives, I think that the biggest thing I would want to take away for them is that we have reports. I mean, we can report on pipeline. We can report on revenue. These are numbers that are fairly indisputable. Pipeline, maybe. I mean, we know what are open opportunities, right? But let's just say revenue. We know revenue is closed won business. There is a dollar value that is black and white on that. Everything else up until that point is kind of a working report. And so if there was a little bit more grace in terms of these are working reports that we are constantly reacting to, that this report is not a fact of quarter one. An attribution report is more like, this is where we are quarter one. This is what we have learned from this. we have assessed quarter one, we have taken this information, this is how we're pivoting and changing and growing for quarter two, and that we are constantly using these reports more as working reports. That is where I think we're going wrong with attribution right now. It's kind of, they're kind of being carved in stone as if this is a fact of how marketing performed. And I don't think they're carved in stone. So my goal would be that, you know, we get to the point that we see attribution as a tool to move forward rather than the reports that are needed themselves to like prove marketing's worth.
Gosh, that's so good, right? And I think that's also the rub with marketing attribution software.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you can do marketing attribution, but so you buy a software tool, but they want it to be something that you can plug and play. And so that's why I think some softwares sell it as that, right, Carey? Is that they're selling you like, oh, we have the report that's going to answer all your questions. And it's like, man, I think you're going to, like in the long run, that's where you're going to get challenges. That's where attrition is going to happen, right? And I love the way in which you presented that of like, no, this is going to be maturing. This is going to take time. You bought the right software, but you got to allow this to take time to mature, right? And so you can understand what's needed there. Just so good, right? We don't want to fit every single department into a box of saying this is the model for you or this is what you need to do, right? That because that's where I think marketing attribution gets a really bad rap is when we start doing stuff like that.
Yeah, it is.
Cool. All right, so for those who have watched Attribution Time or listened, you know I like to ask a pop question. Carey does not know this question.
I do not know this question.
So it's always fun. But I did some sleuthing on the interwebs, and I found that you're leading this thing called Corpse Strength.
Yep.
And that to me is just awesome. What I read about it. So I would love for you to kind of just share a little bit about that, give a plug, how that start, all that.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. I started a company called Core Strength, and it's core. If you're familiar with, my husband was a Navy corpsman. Corp is like the Marine Corps, and corpsman. It's like the Latin root word for body and all that. I should really have that better. But anyways, my husband, very long story short, was a combat veteran. And shortly before he retired from the Navy, he was in a really bad motorcycle accident and had a brain injury, had a lot of physical injuries, had PTSD coming back from Afghanistan. So we had a lot of complex injuries. And what we learned through that is that even though there's a lot of wonderful organizations out there, it's harder to find them in the moment when you need them. And I was kind of working full time. We had small children. Trying to be a caregiver to him, I was spending a lot of time like on the phone and the computer, trying to keep authorizations active, trying to look for any sort of education or services that might help us kind of navigate that and get through it easier. And so in that time, you know, there was times where I was on the phone 8-10 hours a week. All of that time spent was not being a wife, not being a mom, not being a friend, or just being me. And so now that we're 5 years past the accident and he is healed and we're much better, we wanted to kind of take what we had learned, and hopefully I felt like I was blessed with a unique set of skills of marketing and design and understanding logistics and how to do this. And what if God's gift to me was this accident that showed me like, hey, you have these skills and here's a problem that needs to be solved. So I really appreciate you asking about it, because this is a passion of mine, kind of blending marketing operations with people in need. And right now we're solely, I would say we're focused on veterans and their families, but I certainly don't want it to be limited to that. I mean, veterans are not the only people who have trauma, who have brain injuries, you know, and there's a lot of families out there in need. So as we grow, the goal is to expand and do even more. So thanks. I appreciate that.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for being on, Carey. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
I'll make sure I put your LinkedIn in the description below so people can connect with you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
This was a real pleasure. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.